Thank you for listening to Serves You Right. My name is Andrew, and today we're talking to Camper English, drink historian, cocktail book author of two really fantastic books, The Ice Book and also Doctors and Distillers. Camper is really just a fantastic guy, tons of knowledge, super informative. I had a blast talking to him. So without any further ado, here's Camper English. Thank you for listening to Serves You Right, and my name is Andrew.
Well, cool. Hey, Camper English, thank you for joining us today. Really a pleasure to talk to you virtually.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
So I thought I would start. One thing that really strikes me with your work is just how deep down the rabbit hole you will go. Some people, they have a nice cocktail, they get a nice clear piece of ice, they call it good. But it seems like you get fascinated by these things and you just dive right in. Is that something that's always been true about you, or where does that come from?
I guess I'm a curious person, and part of that is when I think other people are going down the wrong path, then I feel this weird obligation to check and see if they're right or I'm wrong or what the situation is. So some of it is my own curiosity, and some of it is like, that doesn't sound right to me and I want to figure it out. So with the ice stuff in particular, there's stuff that I did, and then there's stuff that other people were saying that I thought, like, I don't think that's right, and I wanted to figure it out. So sort of fact checking the work of other people.
Sure. And we'll definitely get into my trials, tribulations, and failures in ice making later too. But for the listener at home that maybe hasn't checked out your book but is interested, what's the deal with clear ice? Why is it so popular? And what are some of those rumors that you disproved, and how can you make some at home?
Well, clear ice just looks a lot better. That is like 90% of it. And it does function better, or at least more consistently in drinks. But I think that really the aesthetics of it far outweigh every other factor when it comes to clear ice versus cloudy ice. So I always use the analogy that it's like you can drink the same fine champagne out of a styrofoam cup sitting in a gutter or in a crystal flute at a nice restaurant, and it's ultimately the champagne is the same. However, it's totally different experience, and it's going to taste better in a nicer environment. I think it's the same with ice, and that some people are like, I really don't care if my ice is cloudy, the drink tastes the same. Yeah, but could taste a little bit better if the ice was clear. So that's the main part of it. And then I think that a lot of people got newly into clear ice, and by people I mean not bartenders but regular everyday people at home, got more into clear ice during the pandemic, when a lot of people started trying to make their own cocktails at home. And of course, everyone's got to record everything they do these days. So as soon as you take a picture of your horrible, horrifically ugly white crescent refrigerator ice in a cocktail, you realize just how much worse it looks than ice in a cocktail bar. And a lot of people at that point decided that they started to appreciate clear ice and then got into making it themselves. Whereas really up until that point, mostly the whole clear ice geekery and stuff that I was doing was an industry knowledge, or just the top cocktail geeks and bartenders as well. So there was a big critical mass, I think, that happened around 2020.
Well, when we as a society elevated drinking from a pastime to a necessity to curb the spread. So, yeah. Yes, we were all there. We all participated. So, okay, I'm at home and I want to make some clear ice. There really is no way to do it besides directional freezing, is there?
Correct. There is not.
Yeah.
And so, so the basics of making clear ice, for those who don't know, is that a typical ice cube freezes from all sides in towards the center. And I kind of say that water wants to freeze clear. So the first part of an ice cube to freeze is the outside, and that is clear. And usually where an ice cube is cloudy is in the center of the cube. And so it took a staggeringly long time for me to figure that out. But once I did, then the solution to the problem, or the kludge, or the hack, whatever we want to call it, was if we could control the direction that the water freezes into ice, then we can put the clear part of the ice cube where we want it. So we can't get rid of cloudy ice. We can either have it not form or form in the spare part of the cube where we don't want. So long story short, we use an insulated container like a hard-sided cooler, fill that with water, put it in the freezer, and now as the water freezes starting at the top, because it's insulated on all the sides, it will push the trapped air and impurities down towards the bottom of the cooler. And so the first roughly 2/3 or 75% of that water in the cooler to freeze will be clear. And if you leave that cooler in the freezer long enough, the bottom part, when it starts freezing, will be the cloudy part. So you can either let it freeze only for a couple days so that you don't get a cloudy part, or you can chop off the cloudy part at the bottom of the cooler. And then pretty much every variation of making clear ice without moving parts involves a version of that. So you might use a thermos. You might set an ice cube tray in the top of the cooler and have the ice cubes freeze within the trays and be clear on the top and cloudy just on the bottom. There's a lot of commercial products that are just like that system, but there's a hole in the bottom of each compartment of the ice cube tray so that the water goes out the bottom of the tray into the reservoir beneath it, and you only have clear ice in the cube tray. And even just if you put a big container into your freezer that's not insulated and only let it freeze for a day or so, probably what's going to have frozen at that point will only be clear. So it's all directional freezing, just how it manifests or how you manifest it is different and very adaptable.
Yeah, and I think what really got me to grasp that it was all directional freezing, just depends on what direction, is when you talked about making cocktails in ice spheres. So where it's like, you don't have to be careful because if it doesn't freeze solid, you're freezing the outside, that's going to be clear, hollow it out, put the cocktail in there. I was like, because there was a point in my life that I tried to do that and I never did. I was never patient enough to work it out because you got to be careful about timing and you can't take it out when it's too thin. There's a lot of you have to do there. I know I'm complaining about how much work you have to do to the Iceman.
Yeah, I've done 18 years of it so far.
Yeah,
stopping me now, I guess.
Sorry, you go. Yeah.
When I was doing the photos for the ice book, we did all the photos over the course of 3 or 4 days, very long, intense days, but I had to make the ice over the course of basically almost 2 months. Store it in my freezer once it was done, and then a little side freezer, and then I borrowed a bar space in a bar's freezer. But the ice balls were the hardest one because they're very fragile, and as mentioned, the timing is specific. So I froze a whole bunch of ice balls, but I would crack them open to see how good they were going, and till I had enough remaining in the freezer while the right thickness, and that I had to get up at 4 a.m. the night before shooting after freezing for a certain number of hours and keep testing them throughout the night. So yeah, you can turn making ice cubes into a lot of work for yourself.
A full-time profession. Yeah. No, and I could tell that you're someone who's made a lot of ice and has a lot of ice on hand. If you actually specifically have to experience sublimation as a problem in the freezer, then you've definitely made enough ice. So I was not aware. I'm sure at some point, maybe even in like high school, I've come across this, but I did not know that ice in the freezer would, as you put it, sublimate. So it just kind of evaporates without becoming water. So how quickly does this happen?
It takes quite a while. I mean, usually that's a number of weeks before you'll really notice. One time, a friend of mine I was staying with in New York had ice cube trays in his freezer, and they were all like less than half full. And I was like, okay, I refilled your ice cube trays for you. He was like, oh yeah, I never used those. And I was like, oh, like it took me a long time to figure out it's because they had sublimated so far that he orders ice from the deli when he wants ice. Bring it upstairs for me. But the ice cube trays, after months, had reduced the size of each cube in the ice cube tray down to 1/3 of what they originally were. So that's pretty wild. You notice it when you have certain shapes of ice where it's sublimating. off the top or the sides or whatever. And I've done a lot of experiments when I store my ice generally in like Ziploc bags or something like that in the freezer so that they don't sublimate. And, I keep all the smells out of the freezer so they don't absorb odors in the first place. But I did an experiment with putting ice in a bag and keeping it for like 6 months to see what would happen if it would start to come apart at all. And yeah, it got real frosty. I think it's probably been a year now. I have this one sandwich Ziploc size sphere
Just
in
to
my
see.
freezer. I did that experiment and I keep forgetting to end the experiment and measure it, but it's definitely fuzzy with frost now that evaporated off the sphere, but then had nowhere to go.
Yeah, I guess if it's a closed system, it has to stay in there, right? That's
Yeah.
how science works. Yeah, hopefully. Uh, so, I followed along in your footsteps enough to make the clear ice, but what I never did and what I was really fascinated by how much you did was putting things into the ice. So I just got to the clear spheres because that was my goal. I had a sphere making device and I wanted one that was perfectly clear for whatever reason when I was 24. But uh, so, what led you to put so many things into ice? And what are some of the craziest things you have put into the ice? I saw sharks and I've seen coins in your book, but yeah, like,
Yeah, I mean everything. What I do, I don't think we have a Spirit Halloween anymore in San Francisco. For some reason, they don't put them here. But the start of Halloween season, I'm like in line at the Spirit Halloween store to like, what can I put into ice cubes? That's how I move about the world, is like looking for objects that I can freeze inside ice. So I've done, for Halloween, I've done skulls and like bony hands sticking up out of an ice block and giant rats and eyeballs and things like that. Just anything for fun, because ultimately I'm not running a bar program. I'm just a nerd who takes pictures of ice cubes, and I don't need them to, the results don't need to go anywhere other than Instagram. So I frozen, yeah, a handful of coins once. I was like, I don't know, let's throw those in there. Um, some of the dumbest stuff, like other office supplies, all the
the
Halloween
stapler from
stuff.
Office Space.
Just freeze your whole desk set. That's what I should do. If I had office mates, certainly I would have subjected them to that by now.
One thing I do really appreciate about your writing and just kind of your style, and some of the things you've done in the past too, is even though you do these things, though, you're very transparent about your warnings of one, if you put these things into alcohol, that can be dangerous because a lot of these products aren't designed to be consumed, or at least to enter into our mouths or products. Alcohol is a solvent and it can pick up a lot of things we wouldn't expect. I think I forget the way you put it exactly, but it was something along the lines of if you freeze things in ice and give it to children or drunk people, they will drink it at some point. Like sometime it will end up in their mouth. So just be cognizant of that.
They're gonna try to swallow it.
At some point, yes. So
Yeah,
what
I'm
got you
always
sorry, yeah.
I'm always, yeah, want to just make people aware of when you put something into ice, then you got to think about it going in their mouth or down the throat and in the system, and you hope that you have responsible enough people. But if you're making ice with stuff in it for a bachelor party, then that people are going to get wild and be a little irresponsible with things. So it's just what I warn to people who are making the ice for these events is just be aware of your audience. And there's stuff you could do for the beginning of the night versus the end of the night, or if you have to think about who you're serving it to. I don't think everything needs to be so precious in that, like plastic monkeys from a barrel of monkeys or something like that, you could freeze into ice cubes. And I think you should have a reasonable expectation that people won't swallow something that they wouldn't pick up off the ground and put in their mouth. But add alcohol to that equation and things can
Yeah.
go differently.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's candy. What are you gonna do? Yeah.
How was I
um
to know?
Yeah, exactly. I do want to dig into that though. What got you involved into the world of cocktail safety? Because that's also where I often think about like you and your work. So, is it just looking around and seeing some slightly dangerous, uninformed things pop up in the marketplace, or was there a story, a cautionary tale?
Yeah, we were having some conversations with other industry people, largely on Facebook at the time and other sites, where people were getting very creative but not being all that smart about it and using some problematic ingredients. The first two that really kicked off the need for me to, or what I felt was the need for me to build a website about it, were tobacco and then activated charcoal. And with tobacco, it's in the spirits world. We're always saying notes of tobacco, XYZ, and that's a familiar word, and that things pair with it. And there are cigar malt whiskeys and cigar cognacs that are meant to pair with things and have familiar notes, but putting tobacco into a beverage is a horrible idea and extremely dangerous. As people were coming out with all sorts of different and original bitters and selling them locally in particular, or making them at the bar to serve to customers without going through any kind of FDA, TTD approval process, people were making tobacco bitters, which are super dangerous, even in the drops and dashes that people use in drinks. And some commercial bitters were coming out that were tobacco bitters that were containing no tobacco, but being labeled as tobacco bitters could put into the mind of the person using them that you can make tobacco bitters rather than tobacco flavored in big letters bitters, which would have been a more safer option to sort of let people know no actual tobacco is here. So there's a couple things going on.
What is it specifically about tobacco that makes it so dangerous? Because I know they used tobacco to flavor whiskey back in the day, and along with a lot of other unsafe things.
Right. Yeah. So it's the nicotine. It gives you, if you don't smoke cigarettes and then have one really fast, you're going to definitely feel impacts of it. And part of that can be heart palpitations, which get worse, the less used to it you are. And in a cigarette, the amount of nicotine that's in it is you get some certain small percentage of it into your bloodstream, but putting that into alcohol, which is at extracting the active properties of any kind of herb and herbal medicine, etc., you're getting 100% of that nicotine. And so the impact is going to be much, 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 much larger. So despite if you took one cigarette's worth of tobacco for a whole bottle of bitters, it's still problematically high quantity of that.
It's like chewing on a cocoa leaf versus doing tons of lines of cocaine or something like that. Right. Just a step change in difference. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Well, yeah, so I know people who have. I had a friend who is a very small person, probably weighs 100 pounds, and was saying, like, I don't know what it is, but every time I have a tobacco old fashioned, I feel really sick afterwards. And I'm like, well, I know what it is. It's the tobacco.
Called
even though it's just
nicotine poisoning. Yes.
And it's an insecticide. It can be really quite bad for you, or even deadly. It's just that one is an absolute no-go in no form. I don't even really believe in, smoking for this, using the smoking guns and those smoke cocktails with it. I don't know how dangerous that is, but I'm just I think we could do without it. Use wood instead.
Why tempt fate there?
If you're enjoying this so far, please take a moment, hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, or share with a friend that you know would get value from this as well. All right, back to the podcast.
Yeah, and I think that, so one factor is it being toxic itself if you serve it to a person or drink it yourself. A second factor is the labeling of it. If your menu says whiskey, simple syrup, tobacco, that might inspire someone to go home and do it. So that's a question of whose responsibility is that versus, they're using safe tobacco bitters that are tobacco flavored, but the person goes home and makes tobacco bitters. I think it's worth discussing that can be problematic. And I don't know that it's always the bar and the bartenders' fault of that, but we can do better for our customers. Hospitality means not inspiring people to go home and poison themselves.
Sure. Yeah. I guess there's no other, there wouldn't be a activated charcoal brand vodka you would put on a menu. Like, tobacco is a very specific thing that could lead people to think that.
Yeah, that's like of everything. the most dangerous is tobacco by far. Some of the techniques. So I don't know if you stated it yet, but the website is cocktailsafe.org, which is
Oh,
a website I put together with a list of techniques as well as ingredients and whether they're generally safe or not, or some rules to be aware of about them, and legality of them. So those are often different issues, like the legality versus the safety of things like sassafras in cocktails and
known
tobacco, which
carcinogen,
is
right? Yeah. Yeah.
well with 1950s technology, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Not
in
before
reality,
then,
I don't
unfortunately.
know because no one
Yeah.
has spent the money to test for the actual safety of it since then.
Hmm.
those
Yeah.
are those are some of the issues addressed, and I think the first thing is just to be aware, and the real goal of cocktail safe is like, hey, if you're using something that you haven't seen before, put it into
Look it
the
up.
search bar,
Yeah.
or even on Google, put word of ingredient and then safe, word of
Now,
ingredient, danger.
I feel
See what
like,
happens.
and this has been long enough that it may not have been you, but I feel like I did end up reading something you wrote when we were talking, like me and another bartender were talking about making our own tonic syrup. I feel like
Hmm.
we came into some info from you and we're like, let's not do that. That's good. Yeah. It's been probably 10 years though, but yeah.
Yeah, there was a big trend a while back of making your own tonic syrup because, bartenders like, oh, let's try to make everything that we can in house. It's going to be the least processed, the most natural. The larger problem for me is that tonic syrup is brown and tastes like dirt.
Yeah.
I think that you get a much better experience by just drinking the stuff from the bottle. But yeah,
Yeah.
people did run into problems with quinine, excess quinine in their homemade syrups. And the people who ran into the most problems were the bartenders experimenting with it and testing the recipes over and over and over again, building up in your system, and then experiencing some of the impacts of that.
Yes. Things that we probably haven't seen in the Western world since we had all the problems with malaria.
Right.
So we've been dancing around it. Let's dig into it. So doctors and distillers. Where did you come up with the idea that with that book? That's such a cool work.
Thank you.
Uh yeah.
Well, I am always kind of making lists and categorizing things. And so, in the history, when we look at cocktails and spirits and you study them in any depth, you run into medicine in a lot of places, even if you're not looking for it. So, citrus and scurvy, quinine and malaria, even whiskey to cleanse the wounds on the battlefield and things like that. You keep running into alcohol if you're looking at medicine. You keep running into medicine if you look at alcohol. And so I would start putting those on a list somewhere, and the list kept getting longer and longer. I wrote a little self published book on the history of the gin and tonic, mostly the tonic, and that became basically a chapter of Doctors and Distillers later on after I gave some talks about it. Because I just realized that the history of alcohol and medicine are in part, a major overlapping history, if not the same history, for a lot of time, particularly as distilled spirits were developed. That was developed as medicine specifically and used as such for 100 years or so before recreational consumption was more of a factor. But yeah, really
No.
just like looking at all the different ways alcohol and medicine overlapped, and realizing, one, it was enough material for a book on that, and two, surprisingly, I couldn't find a book that hadn't been written on that topic yet in any kind of long way, more like fun facts you can find. Did you know scurvy was cured by
Yeah.
limes and etc.?
Different books kind of hint at it, but nothing that dug into that connection deep like you did. Yeah, it is wild. Like, and I'd forgotten. I knew a little bit of the history of some of the like past physiology, like the Galens of the world. So like the humors, and you hear some references to that. I had never heard. What was this? I'm probably butchering this. Paracelsus.
Yeah.
I don't
Oh,
know if
I mean,
he's
I
a
don't know
name
how
that
it's pronounced,
is.
honestly.
Yeah, but
I
I
also
mean,
learned it from books.
yeah, do you mind talking about this guy? Because I never heard his name, and he sounded like the funnest. Well, no, the least fun guy in history, but such a cool spot. Yeah,
Yeah, so I had also never heard of Paracelsus before doing the research for this book. And he becomes this important person in the history of medicine, less so with alcohol, but it did change how people viewed the theories of medicine, which would impact the treatments of them. So Paracelsus was a wandering physician who traveled around Europe and was very big, blustery jerk who like was all about being anti-establishment as far as the medicine. And the medicine for the last 1,000 years or so was Greek and Roman medicine of Galen and the four humors. And to reject that long established medicine was a big deal. He was reported to have burned the books of Galen on the steps of a university or something like that, and proposed his own theories of medicine, which were, so the four humors is, first of all, it's garbage, it's not true, and it's based on this completely bad understanding of human anatomy, which is,
Still shows up in some of our words, surprisingly, but yeah.
it sure does. And the
Yeah.
whole thing about leeches and bleeding and stuff like that, that like in the mid to later 1800s, people were still doing that sort of thing. All goes back to that Greek and Roman medicine of like, you've got to rebalance the fluids in the body. And what Paracelsus did was reject that theory and espouse some of his own. Almost none of his ideas were effective themselves. They were all wacky medicinal cures, a lot of them using minerals and sort of chemistry-ish, more like mineralogy in medicine. And none of them worked, but they were so ineffective that people healed on their own rather
Mm-hmm.
than you like keep bleeding the person until they get better.
Yeah. And I mean,
But
in a
Galen was
day and
famous.
age, yeah, when there's no sanitation, nothing. So like you were continually reopening a person who's suffering versus giving them something ineffective and letting them chill for a minute.
Yeah. So we get from Galen the dose makes the poison of that, which is true, and that less, if you give someone less medicine, effective or not, that person has a chance to heal themselves. And that ended up working, but it changed how people viewed, it helps people switch from believing in the four humor system to a more modern theory, also helped by modern understandings of human anatomy. But the thing about Paracelsus was that he talked a lot of smack, and that's what makes him so much fun.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone hated the guy except for his own fans, and they cleaned up the nonsense in his work afterwards. But that's what made him kind of a fun character. I would love for there to be like a 2-season series about the life of Paracelsus, going through the world and just talking smack and like getting out of
Burning
trouble
books.
because
Yeah.
someone just healed on their own.
Heck yeah. Okay, continuing from the past to the present, we've got ancient views of the body and health. Tell me about alchemy, because alchemy has a big overarching influence from the beginning, everything from like the quintessence all the way to the distillation itself. Like, how did alchemy get all tied up in booze?
Yeah, I was really surprised, and it took me the longest time of any concept in the book to figure out how, when distilled alcohol is created by Western alchemists, why they thought it was the perfect medicine, and why they thought it was the philosopher's stone, why they thought it would make you live forever. Like, what medicinal theory of sorts was it? And so it took me like a few months and a few books to sort of put it together. And that is basically, the alchemists were sort of proto chemists, that they were trying to understand the world through any kind of science as it was in that era. And science as it was at that era was just mixed up with religion and astronomy and astrology and all that together. And by trying to figure out most of the world, it was about taking things apart and separating things. To a chemistry tool for that is distillation. So the alchemists were always using distillation from probably the year 300 till, it's 1,000 years later, they figure out how to make alcohol with that same tool, which is pretty fascinating itself. But that they were like, take let's say a metal and corrode it with vinegar and then distill it and then look at the different parts, because you've done a separation now, and that sort of chemistry over and over again to break things down and to try to extract the active essence of material. So a person you could think of as, the physical body, but also their soul or their spirit or their human energy. And the alchemists, what they would want to do, according to their philosophy, was separate those two things. And so you have just their spirit captured without being attached to a body. Okay, so now take that same philosophy and apply it to wine. That's what distilled spirits were. It was the active energy of wine was the brandy that you got out of the end of it, because you had separated it from the red fermented wine, and now you have something very intense and powerful and active and useful in medicine. And pretty quickly they figured out all of the physiological impacts of it, that it gives you more energy. It will kill lice on your head.
Yeah.
It changes how your eyes work when you throw brandy in them, and all of this stuff that was very impactful and very strong compared to any other medicine or alcoholic beverage at the time. So they're like, we've done it. We figured it out. We've separated the active energy of the universe from its corporeal form. We did it, fam. And that's why they thought that distilled alcohol was sort of the active energy of the entire universe. It was a really, really big deal. The alchemist of its age. And yeah,
I want to add a couple of points there. When you distill anything alcoholic and you get a stronger product, it also often is shelf stable, which is something that would have been quite shocking back in the day, to have a substance that doesn't decay but just sticks around. And if it's high enough in proof, it's flammable too. And I'm sure that's something that really shocked a lot of people. It's the strong, indestructible, concentrated. Yeah, we
both
found
of those
it.
factors those are like the two most important things that people comment on. First of all the names for it were burning water or flaming water, that you could dunk a cloth in it and the cloth wouldn't burn, but yet the cloth was burning because of the alcohol burning off. That was magic, basically. There's nothing else that did that existed in the natural world. So that's a big deal. And then for millennia, people were using an infusion of herbs into wine or beer as medicine, because people long understood not only does that make it drinkable as medicine, but also that it extracts the active properties of plants. And so, you take your rose petals and put them in wine for a long time, and then you filter out the rose petals, and then you have rose wine for as long as it lasts, which can be a long time, but into high proof alcohol. As you said, like now that's really the pure essence of your rose petals that will last essentially indefinitely. A big step forward in technology and in medicine as they saw it at the time.
And then tell me about how, this is alchemy. It's all tied up in religion and science. Talk to me about the monks. When the monks come in and the monks start making their own herbal liqueurs, is that itself a continuation of this alchemical journey, or is that its own journey up to itself?
Well, there's a few things happening with the monks, and that they were kind of closed off from the rest of society, although they were often supported by royalty somewhere. And I think that we forget, or at least I didn't even know it at all, that they were landlords. And so they had serfs working the land that would provide them with materials. But if we think of like a monastery environment, they're going to have their own doctors, herbalists, slash pharmacist people there. They would often treat the people who worked the land there. So they were the hospital for the community, as well as they were the people who could read and write. They copied books from one to another. They were the nodes on the information highway, such as it was, with people taking pilgrimages across Europe and would stop in from one monastery to the next, and often, take this book to the pharmacy, to the monastery, down the road or whatever. So because they were these enclosed environments, that they had to make their own medicine, and they had the books to learn about it and pass that along. So in a way, they were a parallel to the universities, and even before universities, they were performing that function. They were the centers of knowledge when even the royalty couldn't read, along with 90% of the populace. So because they're the centers of learning, that's where medicine was pushed forward. Alchemy was pushed forward at monasteries. So that's kind of the reason. And then because they would tend to have their own herbal gardens and apothecaries and distillation on site, they often took those preparations forward. Now, getting into, let's say, 1600 and those eras, each one is developing more complicated all-purpose medicines, and that's where we get what becomes things like chartreuse later on, is that this has every healthy herb and plant and root that we think is good for digestion and healing and insect bites and everything else, all in one medicine to treat people as well as to sell to people to raise money for their actions. And in the case of chartreuse specifically, the monastery in Grenoble, which became the home of the chartreuse liqueurs, they used to trade in lumber and in ironworks, but then a lot of deforestation was prevented by the king at the time. They needed a new industry and thus pushed forward sales of their liqueurs, particularly after the French Revolution as well. They needed money and they sold medicine, and that medicine is something that we put in our cocktails to this day.
Yeah. And I believe you put in how much they sell, and it was a large number. It surprised me. It's something like 1 million bottles a year or something crazy. Like,
Yeah,
one
it's
place. Yeah.
extraordinarily large and has been for a long time. I was surprised looking back in archives of newspapers, like how the monks were in the news all the time around 1800 and the French Revolution years. And people followed the saga of chartreuse even then, much like we do today.
Okay.
So it's kind of
So
always been popular.
in my head, I was kind of thinking of it as a reaction to alchemy, but it seems like it was more a continuation and just a place where knowledge and ability could flourish. And so they just kind of carried the torch forward. Maybe would have been a better way to have thought about the monks. So, okay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. They practiced their own sort of alchemy, but alchemy had kind of changed because as science became its own discipline, we start separating the religious aspects of it from the medicinal and scientific aspects of it, which doesn't really, I don't think, interfere with each other and doesn't, in their eyes, invalidate religion by treating science as science. But is just sort of, as time progresses, they become separate disciplines. I think so. We get chemistry and physics and math and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas when at the time at which alcohol was developed, those weren't not disciplines and we didn't have the scientific revolution yet. So there was no understanding that there's a difference between, the moon is in Jupiter and distillation and evaporation. Like that was, they were like part of the same system.
Yeah.
Later became
It was
separate
all
doses.
new and exciting, and we'll just kind of see what happens. Yeah. We probably would be remiss if we didn't touch at least a little bit on the whole plight of scurvy and malaria, kind of towards the end of the early era and bringing us into the modern era. Just how much effort and how much human work has gone into preventing those two things is it's kind of wild. Pretty
Yeah.
much every booze combination you could have mentioned said good for scurvy, good for malaria. Like, yeah.
Yeah, particularly, quinine and as a cure for malaria, and then malaria as a disease are two topics that carry through to humanity for millennia. We think it's possible that malaria impacted the dinosaurs, and dinosaurs evolved into birds, and birds get malaria. So it kind of makes sense that impact carry through, and we first were able to understand the mechanisms of malaria through the study of birds, which I think is pretty interesting there. But so people have always suffered from malaria caused by the parasite, which is transmitted by the vector of mosquitoes rather than the mosquitoes have poison in them. They have plasmodiums in them. But so, yeah, it's a disease that always plagued humanity. It had prevented humans from traveling to certain places like Africa, the continent. I mean, of course, there were people living in Africa, but it prevented the colonization for a long time until quinine came into the equation. So in the early 1600s, Jesuit monks in Peru and Bolivia learned from the indigenous people there of a bark that was good for fevers and headache. And it turns out that that also cures the underlying disease of malaria, even though they didn't have malaria in the Western Hemisphere at that point, as far as we can tell. So a great medicinal coincidence changed really the whole format of the world and where people were able to go and how long people were able to live and things like that.
Yeah.
A huge medicinal discovery that ended up into every possible form of medicine that was imaginable, whether that's like an oil with quinine in it or all of the wine, quinine wines, quinine in beer, quinine in whiskey, and every patent medicine that you could order through the mail. And it was, I call it like the electrolytes of 1850. I don't know
Yeah,
if it's
yeah.
going to do anything for your shampoo, but let's put it in
It
there
can't hurt. Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's healthy.
Yeah.
So that's how it
Awesome.
ended up in like everything. Amaro, we think of quinine being just in tonic water, but quinine is in most Amaros, as well as a lot of like vermouths and other fortified wines as well. It's still in everything.
Yeah. I mean, most of the Amaros that are around have secret or ancient recipes that they've been using forever. So it makes sense if that was the electrolytes of the day. It's like throw a little in there. Yeah,
Couldn't hurt.
exactly. You know, kudos to you. This is the only book that I think could have the chapter titled Syphilis and Root Beer. I thought that was a bold move, but
I
I
wanted to
definitely
call the book
liked
that.
the just interweaving how difficult how much difficulty we've had with diseases and what all we've done to try and address them. You do that so well throughout the book, and it is amazing, the distillation and the doctor connection. It's there. It's deep. It's super cool.
Yeah, it's wild how it formed the understanding of things that end up being purely recreational now, and just how much medicine, formerly known as medicine, that we're like drinking. Like, I love root beer, and I make a fun party guest when I'm telling everyone syphilis stories. It's
Yeah.
makes for good
And
good bar banter.
I had heard once that there was a cure for syphilis and it was injecting people with malaria, and I never, like, that was like anecdotally someone said, have you ever heard this? And this is the first time I encountered it in a book, like, oh, this is a real thing. This this is not just like some random party story.
Yeah,
So
it was actually true. I heard that it was something like that was on an episode of the show House. Someone told me. I haven't seen
maybe
it,
that's where
but
they heard it too.
yeah.
Huh. Are there any crazy stories that you couldn't find enough backing to put in the story, but you're like, oh, if only I had validated that one, that would have been perfect for this book?
There were none that I can think of offhand at the
Sure.
moment. I know there's a lot of stuff that I was like, is that true or how much is it true? The one thing that is probably true, but I've never found the smoking gun, is that Catherine de' Medici brought liqueurs to France from Italy. Like that's something that's always repeated. I don't think I put it in the book, but it's possible that
Hmm.
I did. A
People
lot of
just
things
kind
I
of
was
say
like,
that.
according to the brand, like everything about Benedictine is according to the brand, meaning like maybe not true at all.
Sure. Yeah.
That so that's I've always been interested in that sort of fun fact, which I've seen repeated 1,000 times and never seen a document for it. But it could be like that was when Italy was civilized and France was, according to some people, considered uncivilized in that era, and bringing all of the delicious liqueurs that we more associate with France than Italy today there. So that's like one thing that, like, because I wasn't able to dig into it any deeper, I left that on the cutting room floor. I've always wanted to
Yeah.
look through, I have for every chapter in the book, I have like pages and pages and pages of stuff that I didn't use. So for each chapter, I have unused material, chapter one, and I haven't yet gone back to look through them because one, it's a lot of stuff, but I thought it would be fun to do like, fun fact and stuff for Instagram that may not have fit, and sort of
Oh, that
mine
would be
that
cool.
extra data that I have to
Yeah.
do.
All the stuff that was just not on topic, but still interesting, almost made it. Right.
Yeah, or maybe like a
Yeah.
little bit too gross.
There's a lot of, I mean, you reference what is it, Fizz Donovan, his work,
Yeah.
and his story, the lady May Donahue, she finds a decomposing snail in her ginger beer, and it's like some of the beginning of like legislations against bottlers, and like, no, you have a care of duty to protect your consumers. Like, but like I can never not picture a decomposing snail in a bottle of ginger beer after hearing that story. It's just, yeah. But
That's funny. Yeah, that's a
for
great book for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. It's called Fizz, and it's the
yeah,
history of sodas and carbonation in general.
yeah, he's a cool guy. He's been on too, so we got to talk a lot about that.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Um, for the listener at home, where should someone go to find out more about you and the work you do?
My website is alchedemics.com. I have everything kind of stems from there. If you are listening to this in September, I have to change my host and it's going to be a mess for a bit. So check back later if it's not
Oh
currently
yeah.
up.
Well,
But
this is going up
also,
right before Halloween, so you've got a little bit of time to get it
right,
locked
I'm
out.
trying to fix it in the next week or so. But
Awesome.
also, my other website, cocktailsafe.org, has the safety information that is hopefully a great resource for people to check before engaging in both using unusual ingredients, but also some techniques like using liquid nitrogen. And if you're worried, dry ice, if you're worried about safety, maybe give it a look.
Sure, yeah. That is Coyote Cafe when we were playing around with liquid nitrogen. That is, if I remember, where we went to make sure we knew what we were doing before we started having too much fun, which
Right.
was
Yeah.
probably smart. Uh,
I'm a little afraid of it myself.
you know, if you have someone who is experienced and confident, like Quinn Stevenson, the owner, was, like, you do become used to it, but it's just, it's like playing with fire behind the bar. It's doable if you know what you're doing, and if you're not reckless. If you're reckless, it's stupid, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. uh and then for those of you who are listening, I will have links to those websites in the show notes in case you didn't get to write that down if you're in your car or anything like that. If you are listening to, please go pick up the Ice Book, Doctors and Distillers. Ice Book is a nice, short, easy, quick read. Doctors and Distillers is a little bit longer. Actually, I reread it on the flight, which was it was a good one. It kept me company. Yeah. Well, Camper English, thank you for coming on tonight. It was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. It was great,
Of course.
great doing this and talking to you.
Thank you again for listening. If you have not, please like, subscribe, and also leave a comment on this show. Every interaction is really, really appreciated. I respond personally to every message, comment I get. Episodes of this show come out every Tuesday, every week. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.